Hello students, welcome to the business law session for B.B.A 5th semester. So far we have completed the module 1 which deals with the meaning of contract, essentials of the valid contract, and in detail we have studied the various essentials right from offer, acceptance, competency of the parties, consideration, legal object, free consent. Here up to here we have studied the agreements disqualified by law, and also we have noted about contingent contracts and quasi contracts, whether they are valid contracts or not. We have given the explanation there. So that completes your first module. So we are moving to the second module, that is performance of the contract. So this is a topic which we have to study in the second module. Along with this you will be having modes of discharge of contract, the breach of contract, and the remedies for the breach of contract. This will be covered in module 2. So today we will take up the performance of the contract, and there is a 5 marks question in this from your examination point of view, that is rules of valid tender. It's a 5 marks question from your examination. What are the rules related to the tender? So the question may be, what is tender, and mention the rules of valid tender. This may be a question for 5 marks. So this is what we are going to discuss. But first we will try to understand here what you mean by the term performance. So what is the meaning of this performance? Performance means carrying out respective obligation by the parties to the contract. So as you know that in a contract there are two parties. One is a promisor and one is a promisee. Both are here making a promise. So what is the promise by the promisor? To here mainly deliver the goods or to sell the goods. So whatever may be here the promise. The promisor makes the promise, and the promisee makes here a promise to give the value of that goods what he receives. So that is here reciprocal consideration will be there. So both have got certain obligations to do. So here the performance of the respective obligations. So whatever obligation responsibilities are imposed on the parties, they have to mainly carry out those obligations. They have to here fulfill those responsibilities, and that is called as the performance. Performance of the contract. Performance of the responsibilities imposed on the parties in a contract. That is what we call it as the performance. It also includes here attempt to perform. So where one party, that is usually the promisor, makes an attempt to perform, but the promisee refuses to accept. So promisor has mainly performed his obligation. It is as good as he has performed his obligation. So that we call it as attempt to perform. He has made an attempt to perform. It is enough and it is considered as good as a performance. He need not perform it again. So this attempt to performance is called as the tender. Attempt to performance is known as the tender. So where a promisor, for example, A has made a promise here to B to deliver the oil here 100 tons for whatever price it is quoted, and B had agreed to pay that price. So A here delivers here mainly the oil here mainly to B, but B refuses to accept it. So A has discharged his obligation. So it is as good as he has performed his obligation. But there are certain rules we have to see when a tender becomes a valid tender. Means when the attempted performance becomes valid. What are the rules laid down? That we are going to study, and that is the main topic. So performance means it is both here execution of the respective obligation by the parties or attempt to perform here is also as good as performance. So this is what you mean by the term performance. Then who should perform? So the answer is very clear. The person who has promised, he has to perform. The promisor has to perform. The promisor has to perform. So it is his responsibility. Or he can authorize it to his here agents, or his legal hands can perform. Later after his death, the legal hands can perform. So who should perform? It is the promisor or his legal representatives or the agent, authorized agent can perform it. Who can claim the performance? So the performance can be claimed by the promisee or his legal representatives or his authorized agent. So he has got the right to claim the performance. So who has to perform? Promisor. Who has right to claim the performance? Promisee. So this is what we have got. And if there are more than one promisor, here the other promisors must join hands and discharge their responsibilities. The responsibilities has to be discharged. So this is what the law says there. So who should perform and who can claim the performance there. So as I told you, this is what is the meaning of the performance there. But what you mean by the term tender, and here what are the rules laid down in the law, that is most important here, and that is the question for you. So what is a tender, and state the rules of valid tender. They will ask you in the examination. So here the answer is tender means attempted performance. Attempted performance is called as a tender. Attempted performance is the promisor has made a attempt to perform his obligation. The promisor has made an attempt to perform his obligation. So that he has mainly fulfilled his obligation or his responsibility. It is good as here he has performed it. It is as good as, it is taken in the eyes of the law that it is as good as the performance. So attempted performance by the promisor. For example, as I told you, A and B have made a contract. A has said that he will deliver 100 tons of cotton to B on so and so date, and B has agreed to pay the price of that. A takes the cotton on the day that was fixed to deliver it to the B, but B refuses to take the delivery. So as far as A is concerned, he has fulfilled his obligation. So that is what we call it as tender. He has made a tender. He has made an attempt to perform. So later he need not perform. So what he has made an attempt to perform is as good as he has performed his obligation. That is what the law considers. He need not perform it again. So this is what you mean by the term tender. So when they ask you the question, what you mean by tender, and state the rules, first give the meaning of the tender. So what you mean by this tender? First you have to give the meaning. Then you have to give the rules that have been laid down for a valid tender. So the tender must be valid tender. Attempt to performance means it should be here a valid attempt. So it should here mainly see that it is a reasonable attempt to perform. So there are certain rules laid down in the law to make a tender a valid tender. So students, please don't say that what you mean by tender means, because the students will be writing, many times we have seen in the answer script that tender means for any work. Tenders are called by the authorities to do a work. For example, PWD here issues a tender here for the construction of roads. Tender is called, and the tender is mainly put by the bidder. Don't explain that is not a tender. So that is known as a tender, but in this here circumstances, the tender what we are using the word is attempt to perform. Don't give the meaning of that what you have the tender. It is for to do a work, any authority is calling for the people to file the tender. So filing of the tender is called by the authorities to do a work or a job. That is also known as tender, but in this context we do not take that meaning. Here what does tender means is attempted performance. So attempted performance here is a tender. So there are certain rules laid down. What are those rules? The first one is tender must be to the whole obligation. So where the promisor makes an attempt to perform or to make the tender, the whole obligation, whatever obligation is imposed on him by the contract, he has to here make an attempt to perform the whole obligation. For example, X has promised to deliver 20 tons of brick, 20 tons of cotton to Y. X has promised to give 20 tons to Y, and Y has agreed to give the price on a particular date. On that date, X takes 10 tons and asks Y to take the delivery. He asks the Y to take the delivery. Y refuses on the ground that it is not a valid attempt because you have promised to deliver on that day 20 tons and you have brought only 10 tons. It is partial. So it is attempted performance. The attempt you are making to perform must be to the whole obligation. So what was promised 20 tons, you have to take all the 20 tons. Then if Y refuses, your obligation is over. Now the refusal by Y is valid because here you have made a partial attempt to fulfill your obligation, not the whole obligation. So always when you make an attempt to perform your obligation, it should be to the whole obligation. This is the first rule. The second one is here the tender must be made to the proper person. Tender must be made to the proper person. So usually who is a proper person here to make a tender? It is the promisee. So the promisor has to make an attempt to perform. Here to a proper person means here it is to the promisee or any authorized agent of the promisee. I am using the word authorized agent. Authorized agent of the promisee. Here the attempt to performance should be there. So to the proper person and to the mainly the person must be a part of the contract, that is usually the promisee or his authorized agent. He is the proper person. Proper time. So the attempt to performance must be within a proper time. Proper time means within business hours. Within business hours. Usually the business hours is taken from 10 to 6. 10 to 6, morning 10 to evening 6 is taken usually the business hours. So whatever you want to make the attempt to perform or you want to perform your obligation, you have to choose a proper time. That will be here the time of here the business time. You cannot go at any time and make an attempt to perform. You cannot go here a person at midnight and ask him to take the delivery of the goods. It is not a proper time. If he refuses, here he is doing a right thing because the time chosen by you is not a business hours. So always the person who wants to make an attempt to perform or who wants to here propose for the performance, he should choose the proper time, and the proper time is business hours. In the business hours, the attempt should be there. Proper place. This is also important. The proper place. So what is the proper place? Proper place is usually the place of business. So where the person is running the business, here that is the most proper place. So the tender must be made at a proper place. So for example, here X has promised to deliver the goods to B. So where he has to deliver? It is in the business premises. He cannot take the goods to the mainly Y's house and ask him to take the delivery there. So that is not a proper place. Proper place is a business premises. Where the business is carried out, here the tender must be made. So X goes to the business place and makes the tender. That is a valid tender. It should be business place and business times. So the time and place is most important in the performance of the contract. Time and place. You have to see business hours and business place. So that is here the rule that is there for the tender. And the last one is sufficient time should be given to the promisee to inspect the goods. Sufficient time for inspection of the goods to promisee. You cannot be in a hurry. You cannot say that to take delivery. Promisee has the right to inspect the goods. Now usually when the goods are ordered on sample, the goods have been given on sample. When a sample is shown and you have ordered the goods, so when the goods arrive at his premises, the promisee has here the right to inspect whether the goods he has mainly received, they match with the sample or not. So sufficient time must be given for the inspection of the goods to be delivered to the promisee. So these are, if all these rules are present, then the tender becomes valid. Then we call it as a valid tender. So in an attempt to performance, here the tender means attempt to perform, and these are the rules laid down to make the tender a valid tender. And when these rules are fulfilled, the attempt to perform made by the promisor is as good as performance. He need not perform it again. He need not perform it again. And here the refusal made by the promisee, here the promisor also get a right here for the breach, and he can file a case against the promisee for the breach of the contract. Because he has fulfilled his obligation, the promisee has not fulfilled his obligation. So he gets a right to file a case on the breach of contract and claim the remedies there. So this is one of the small topic in your mainly the syllabus, the performance, attempt to performance. This is the question for 5 marks you will be getting in your examination. The next one we are taking another most important question, modes of discharge of contract, which I will be discussing in the next class. Thank you.